Hey there, all you Penguin Trekkie fans. I have a question for you. In 2025, is current modern day Star Trek still relevant? Does it still matter? Does it still affect the culture? Let's talk about it. So, modern day Star Trek, is it relevant? Well, Robert Meyer Burnett, a while back, on the 59th anniversary of Star Trek, which was last week, read several different articles, and one of them I like, and I thought I would read the article and then talk about things in it. So let me switch over here to the article. And the article says, does Star Trek matter anymore? I thought that was very thought-provoking because for me, growing up, Star Trek was everything that I liked in television. It still is, old Star Trek is still my favorite intellectual property out there to this day, at least up until 2009. So the author of this article, does Star Trek matter anymore? The short answer is no. And I agree with almost everything he said in this article. If you want to know more, then read on. Sure, let's do that. Let's read on. I can remember as a very, very little boy, me too, a little penguin, being plunked down on the floor in front of the television set as a family friend's house. If I recall correctly, my parents were there to play cards with another couple. My slightly older sister had some dolls and whatnot, as she had reached the age where she could speak and grasp conversation. She was elsewhere in the room, occupied by her own interests. I was of that age wherein TV held more fascination. While I can't remember what episode it was that played on the network, I do distinctly remember being fascinated by a certain Vulcan's ears. His name was Spock, and my young mind just couldn't figure out those ears. And I agree with him here. I found Spock absolutely riveting and was fascinated with him when I first saw him on TV. As many of us know, the original Star Trek inspired a generation of television viewers in more ways than one to eventually get off the couch and do great things for their fellow man. In fact, there was a time when many card-carrying scientists proudly confessed that their whole reason for pursuing such a career was because they saw science being suitably explored on the Gene Roddenberry program. I know for one, I've spent 30 plus years working in IT and computers. Star Trek was instrumental in me wanting to do that. And to this day, I still have a love for computers. I have a love for science and technology. I equate that because of my father introducing me back in the day to Star Trek, the original series. Trek fueled the interest of military men and women, of astronauts, and even budding storytellers who wanted to capture their own wagon train to the stars, if and when given the chance. But the space show's influence didn't stop there. Oh yeah, a lot of the technology we have now today is all because of Star Trek. All one need to do is look around at the various inventions now a reality that began in one way, shape, or form as little more than just a simple prop or plot device in Star Trek. Today's tablets are clearly derived from those shown in the original Trek and even Next Generation. You ever seen those great pads that like Data and Geordi are messing with? That's where the idea of an iPad came from, or an Android tablet. In case you missed it, Uhura certainly sported the first Bluetooth earpiece. And actually, Spock used to put one in from time to time as well at his science station, that thing sticking out of his ear. Automatic doors and giant panel television screens are everywhere. They're like background noise now. We don't even hardly notice them. They're just that ingrained in our lifestyle that we just take it for granted. Matter of fact, I've seen some people get frustrated when the automatic door doesn't open at the grocery store. Things like GPS, portable memory drives, And the flip phone began with the inspiration of storytellers. Now you could very well be reading this, and think piece of a smartphone yourself. In other words, you could actually be reading this particular article on a smartphone. I'm not, or a cell phone. I'm not. Although I do remember having the very first Motorola StarTech, which was a flip phone, and I was thinking, I've got a Star Trek communicator here. And of course, now they made a Bluetooth Star Trek TOS communicator. You can actually connect via Bluetooth to your phone and answer phone calls that way. It's amazing for all you Trekkies out there. It's true that we're still waiting on holodecks and warp drive, but rest assured that the tech is on someone's drawing board as you finish this very sentence. I would not be surprised at all if somebody like Elon Musk or whatever is working on warp drive right now. I know he's working on like ion drives, which is very similar. But that's more like closer to like the impulse engine or thrusters. So I've always argued that Star Trek is one of television's only programs that is truly timeless. Some of that's owed to being set in an era a few hundred centuries away, as well as universal. I've never insisted that it would always matter. In fact, I'd strongly suggest that today's Trek, those airing most exclusively behind CBS's paywall, in other words, Kurtzman Trek, might be best forgotten when compared with what's come before, or what I like to call OG Trek. From Star Trek Enterprise on back, DS9, Voyager, TNG, TOS, those are what I consider OG Trek. Before 2009, the new modern Trek behind the paywall is not a reflection on quality, because these ventures are arguably well made. The sets they do look fairly decent. Well produced and well acted. Simply put, I simply find them hollow by comparison to what I grew up with. And I like this comment right here. He says hollow. I think it's because even if the special effects and the sets and the actors are all pretty decent, it's still the writing that is lacking. It's hollow. It doesn't have, in my opinion, the cultural impact that it used to. Star Trek no longer covers the controversy subjects. Instead, it's all more like identity topics, which identity changes over time. It can go away. What happened to the timeless storytelling that Star Trek used to be? Because you can watch an episode, even with the cheesy graphics and stuff of Star Trek, the original series, and some of the topics in it are still relevant even today. It's that timeless. And that was back in the 60s. So that's why this author writes this. That's why when I woke up this morning, I asked myself, does Star Trek matter anymore? And it's a very good question. And I asked myself the same thing when I was reading this. I was thinking, does it? Does it really have the same impact it used to have? I don't think so. I come from a generation of kids that built things. We built forts. If we wanted to play superhero, then we had to cull together our own suits and capes and our own weapons. I came from that same generation as well. If it were the winter, we'd go out in our snow. We'd get all bundled up, and my mom would always make sure I'm wearing like 3 layers of clothing. But nevertheless, we had to wear little glovies and booties. But we'd spend the better part of a day building this expansive fort or some type of structure made out of snow and ice to have our adventures in. We didn't care that Mother Nature would have most of it thawed out by tomorrow or the next day, and not certainly by the weekend. To us, it just only meant that if the fort or the building the thing we were made was half melt, that the alien invasion had arrived sooner than we had planned, and we'd soldier on. We'd come up with a new story. Infamously, we cut our knees, we scraped our elbows. If we weren't careful, then we broke a few bones. We'd get back up, dust ourselves off, rub a little dirt in the wound, and try again. We knocked the wind out of one another. Yeah, that happened to me. We rode bikes. We'd build ramps. Oh, my goodness, I about killed myself on a ramp once. And we'd soar through the air, even though we knew we were about to suffer the worst pain imaginable when we hit the ground again and our family jewels were suitably smashed. Those kids that grew up in the same generation as I did and this author know exactly what we're talking about here. They can relate to this. We got outside and played. Our parents may have invented Band-Aids, mercury chrome, and Bactine, but we were the generation that forced them to put it to good use, paid for our wounds sometimes handsomely. Now, what about this current generation, Gen Z, today's children? Well, it would seem that they do the bulk of their living virtually in cyberspace, in the internet. No. I'm not putting down gamers or gaming. This is a cultural reflection about why Trek mattered then and how it's evolved. Yeah, I'm not putting that down either because I'm a gamer myself and I do spend a lot of time now on the internet more than I used to. It's just a thing. And indeed, carpal tunnel can be a harsh mistress, but that's a far cry from falling face first from your treehouse, getting the wind knocked out of you from 20 feet up. One generally leaves a mark. The other is treated with anti-inflammatory drugs. While it's true that both require a bit of imagination, a requisite part of any good childhood, there's still something intangible about getting your hands dirty that just feels good. And it engages your imagination. I almost think this current generation really lacks imagination, and could be why we're seeing the writers that we are, that they don't have any imagination. You know, I've always heard the phrase that when you write what you know. Well, what if all you know is sitting in front of a computer monitor on the internet all day? It's not very exciting prose. No wonder our writers and the stories we're getting nowadays in modern Trek don't have a lot of substance to them. They're hollow. He goes on, because much of this child's experience has transformed the real world to the virtual one. Dare I suggest that we as a society has lost some of our ability to dream and imagine. Exactly. Think of it this way. One generation put a man on the moon while the next one put a robot on Mars. One generation sent a man 1,000 miles away from Earth at the risk of life and limb, while the other sat at a receiving console safely watching a video stream play out. One man planted a flag somewhere that the wind never blows, and another punches buttons, releasing the footage to the world so that everyone gets a participation trophy for this trip to the Red Planet. Both events have significance. Both events require an incredible amount of technical expertise, but to make them happen, still one of them seems fairly hands-off. Storytelling interests people, and good storytelling inspires them. Star Trek's morality tales were clearly grounded in the popular myth-making of television's golden era. Don't get me wrong, I've never believed, unlike others, that Trek's ability to spin good yarn had all that much to do with catapulting mankind into some new age of modern thinking and holistic living. At the end of the day, a good character whose face was painted half black and half white was only just an actor in makeup. A good story that made me think about the wider world outside was honestly little more than that. A mirror held up to my own reflection. It made you internalize what you were seeing on the screen. Made you think about things in your own life or the world around us. After all, here was a show that purported to whisk us culturally to a time when mankind had apparently done away with all vices. You know, no money, no violence, anything like that. If the future was so perfect, clearly not everyone was getting the memo. Like all good morality tales, Star Trek needed heroes, and the crew performed admirably whenever given the chance. Each of them had a purpose, a function on the ship, and it was their particular skill set that more often than not helped save the day. Be it more fast flying by Sulu at the helm, or Dr. McCoy handling a particular difficult surgery or illness in sick bay, or Scotty squeezing out one last bit of power out of the warp core. Ang ginawa si Kakata, nakagawa naman. They proved themselves at the best at their respective positions. I even throw in there Spock being the science officer. He was the go-to guy. If anybody knew what was going on, most of the time it would be Spock. They proved themselves the best at their respective positions, and rarely were they required to be exceptional outside of that particular realm or sphere. See where I might be going with this? In other words, Uhura was a master at communication. Yes, she was. Never did she pull a second shift in sick bay. Her role was on the bridge, supporting command in any related capacity. And in that respect, she served wonderfully. When you have a purpose, a driven inspiration, you can be the best at it. When you're all over the map or tasked with being an expert on everything within your reach, the best is rarely, if ever, achieved. You ever heard the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none? It's because you're stretched too thin to be an expert at any one particular thing. Think about it. In this day and age, if we talk about in reality, doctors are good at what they do. They're not a plumber. They're not a car mechanic. They're not an astronaut. That would be silly to think, okay, our doctor that handles our common everyday cold is now being required to do rocket science and go work at NASA without any training whatsoever, but just grab them and say, let's go. You got to do it. That's just not the way things work. I don't know how many times working in IT, I used to get a customer call up. They would ask for help on their particular technology device that maybe was in a car. But then after they got done with that device, I was helping them. Then they want to know if there's something I can do to help them with their car. And I say, sorry, I just know computers. I don't know anything about cars. You need to call the manufacturer on that. When you're all over the map or tasked with being an expert on everything within your reach, the best is rarely, if ever, achieved. Any professional athlete will tell you that excellence is 90% repetition. An excellent pitcher pitches all the time, every game, every chance he gets. It's that repetition that turns into muscle memory. And when the muscles are trained to do something over and over and over and over again, they naturally get very adept at performing under all kinds of circumstances and stresses. And I can attest to that even working in IT. When I started out working in IT, it took a little bit for me to get the ball rolling with my knowledge base. But now you rattle off something that's happening in Windows, I can tell you probably in 2 or 3 seconds what the issue is. Why? Because I've been consistently over the years fixing the same problem over and over and over again. Matter of fact, most of the time, the first thing I tell anybody, they have problems with Windows, when's the last time you restarted the computer? When's the last time you restarted Windows? Why? Because that right there clears up 95% of all the problems you may have. Just a simple reboot. You're building the muscle memory. While you can't win every game based solely on pitching, there's no doubt that the quality of pitching, because of repetition, will have occurred in every game that's won. Matter of fact, that's why new pitchers aren't as good as some of the older pitchers out there, because they've been doing it for years, doing the same thing for years. They become excellent in their field of expertise. That same analogy can be made of every starship crew member. Even the best navigator known to man will have a tough time surviving when the captain keeps requiring you to steer through whatever it is they're trying to get you to steer through. Today's Star Trek, from what I've seen, Kurtzman Trek, doesn't appear to be crafted as a morality play. Instead, they're gripes about what the script writing staff just plain doesn't like about the world around them. In other words, the writers of the show, instead of making a script that has some type of moral or cultural impact. It's all about how they personally feel about the world at that particular moment. More specifically, their slightly veiled attacks on political policies. Yeah, we've seen that. Even Kurtzman has come out in a news soundbite saying that he believes Star Trek is a platform to push his particular brand of ideology. These screenwriters are using these characters, many of them beloved, to deliver not so much messages of unity and hope for the future. They are clarion cries of revolution for things that might not be in the best interest of humanity, but rather for their personal wish list. And it also makes that story not timeless. Because think about it. Personal interests of individuals change over time. A cultural morality story can be written in such a way to be timeless that you can watch it 50 years later and it still have a message. Instead of championing ideals that we as a culture have already come together against, these storytellers appear more interested in tearing things apart than putting things right. Exactly. This by itself is not without inspiration. The casual Trek enthusiast need only peruse the information superhighway for mentions of "We are Starfleet," a phrase downright majestic if it weren't for its own ambiguity. Instead of focusing on the actual phrases of seeking out and exploring strange new worlds, this next generation, Gen Z, has taken to rallying its youth and young at heart with politically sounding catchphrases like "We are Starfleet" or "We are family." And those aren't necessarily wrong phrases, but the way they're meaning them, it's not the same as what Star Trek used to mean. "We are Starfleet." What does that even mean? Well, it can mean anything you want it to. And that's actually kind of the point of this modern day Trek, what they're trying to do. Perhaps I'm reading more into it than I need, but I'm older than most. You're about as probably old as I am, dude. Perhaps I'm seeing seeds planted in this new cavalry of viewers meant to inspire them to run out, burn down cities, and tear down statues, if for no other reason to avoid being offended. Perhaps a franchise once meant to unite the species around a central path forward and hope and bringing unity is now being used to divide us, to categorize us as for Starfleet or against Starfleet at a time when unity has been found out of step with the contemporary intelligentsia out there. Perhaps I find it painful to see one of my favorite television shows, most beloved franchises, that's brought joy and personal inspiration to countless millions, being refashioned into something meant to be a vehicle of change, only a faithful few, or what I would actually say, almost non-existent audience. Or perhaps, I agree, maybe I'm wrong, just like he is. I don't know if he is or not. I personally don't think he is. The writer goes on to say, "I've always said that first and foremost, Star Trek is a business. And throughout much of the late 1990s, when Trek's motion picture films went through some curious highs and lows as the next generation separated itself from its parents, labeling it as a commercial property was controversial. I can't tell you the number of times I was berated for doing such a simple thing, something honestly fairly benign given what creates debate online today. I feel the same way. There's been times to where I've been criticized because of my stance that I don't like modern day Trek. It doesn't feel like Trek. It doesn't have the military decor in it. It doesn't have the structure. It doesn't have engaging storylines or morale or even cultural storylines. Instead, it's more like personal views of the writers. It's also very hollow, to use the writer's phrase here. it seems it's all about it being self-referential, just kind of like what Star Wars is today as well. And even Doctor Who, that instead of coming up with something new and creative and a new story, it just refers back to old stuff. And even then, they want to retroactively change it, which I can see if you wanted to try to retroactively change canon for a creative, good story, morale reason, fine. But just to do it because you don't like it, that I got a problem. Writer goes on to say, for those who don't know their history, Gene Roddenberry left the original show in its third season. And one of the first things he did was to expand on the marketing possibilities surrounding his show. Just like George Lucas in Star Wars saw the potential for growing an empire around Star Wars about a decade later, Roddenberry saw it with Trek. He turned his eyes toward capitalist ventures that could possibly grant him the income required to continue seeking out and exploring other possibilities. Go figure, he treated it like a business. Wanted to make money. Granted, he still made the rounds speaking at colleges and universities and Star Trek conventions. He met with anyone willing to host him for the purposes of once again keeping alive his vision of mankind's future, that very enterprise itself, as he says tongue-in-cheek. And he did so with the hope that Star Trek would live long and, dare I say, prosper. He never wanted it to end, and thankfully he didn't let it end, or we wouldn't even be talking about this. This video would not even be happening right now. Nor did Paramount. Believe it or not, Paramount at one point really did care about Star Trek and the content that Star Trek was actually saying. They preserved it the way good businessmen and women do, and it's still around today. It's likely grown and changed into something else for the next generation, which I'm not opposed to doing that. But it seems like these current day writers just don't have the experience or the knowledge or the know-how to even tell a good story. It's all about being self-referential, either to what Star Trek is or to their own lives. And they feel like their personal beliefs are more important than telling a good story. And that I have a problem with. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, I'm still convinced that what Trek is today bears so little resemblance from where it's come and how it started, it needed even have the Trek name attached to it. If you really want to do that, why do you have to call it Star Trek? Why don't you just create your own stuff? But that's the thing. They know deep down this new modern audience really doesn't exist, or if it does, it's very, very small. They are piggybacking on the name of Star Trek to try to, quote, get their message out. Problem is, the audience that used to like Star Trek is gone. That's why Paramount is bleeding. That's why Skydance had to come in and buy them. Because make no bones about it, the number one product, intellectual property that Paramount had is Star Trek. It was at one point a moneymaker and what made Paramount a household name. CBS and Paramount and Viacom. Not anymore. But does it matter? Does Star Trek matter anymore? Well, the long answer is above, and he gave a short answer at the outset where he said no. So you've no one to blame at this point but yourself. I suppose it's safe to suggest that it only matters so much as you want it to matter. Art is, after all, entirely subjective. So it only matters so much as any one of us wants to give it meaning. I think not that it doesn't matter, but as I've said, I could be wrong before. So was Kirk. So my final thoughts on this. As a original Trekkie I've been a Trekkie ever since I was 5 years old when my father introduced me to Star Trek. It wasn't called the original series back then. It was just called Star Trek. I also remember when Star Trek Next Generation came out, our whole family huddled around the TV each week to watch the new episode come out. Do I feel like Star Trek has that impact now? No. No, it does not. I do not believe in one way, shape, or form that Kurtzman Trek even matters at all. And it's because they have gone out of their way to make this about their identity and about what they personally believe about the world or their complaints about this or that or whatever, instead of focusing on the one thing that a sci-fi fantasy show about working in outer space should be about: the story, the telling a good space story. It's fantasy, for crying out loud. People want their intellectual properties, they want their TV shows and their movies to be immersive and have escapism, to escape the little things of real life. Because everybody's dealing with bills and worrying about the next doctor visit or car problems, or their boss is giving them a hard time. All this stuff. You just want to have a few moments sometimes of just simply enjoying a good story. Instead, you flip on modern day Star Trek, or just like any of these new modern day stuff like Star Wars or Doctor Who, and you're shoved in your face more about what's happening in the real world. Somebody needs to tell them, get a clue. We don't want, we're trying to watch a show to escape the real world for a few minutes so we can get a breather, to just relax and chill and experience a world that's not like my real world, which can be stressful at times. So I'll put a link down in the description of this article if you want to go read it for yourself. I'll also put a link to Robert Meyer Burnett's original video so you can go back and watch his version on this and watch his take if you really want. I would be interested to find out how you feel about this. Do you personally think that Star Trek, modern Star Trek, matters today? Does it have a cultural impact? Is it a phenomenon to where the family would huddle around the TV and watch each week? Can't wait for the next episode to show up. Or is it just, soon more content, Leave your comments down in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your thoughts on it. And if you found this video interesting, like and subscribe if you like this video. If not, great on you either way. I'm glad you stuck it out. Anyway, I am the crazy little penguin named Whataboutbob, and I'm out the window because, well, there's a whole bunch of troubles blocking the door. So catch you later, peeps. Bye.